Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I've got Elsie with me today, and we're going to be talking all about probably both of our favorite topic of change management, but also how things like standardization can impact an organization. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody an introduction?
Hello, thanks for the introduction, Emma. My name is Elsie Mort. I'm a manager of change communications, and I've worked across several industries, including architecture, engineering, tech. That's kind of my mainstay. And now I'm in the wonderful world of finance.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. And I just as I like to start these conversations, I always want to set the stage. So I mentioned the idea that we were going to be talking about like standardization, modernization of systems, but especially in an organization that's been around for a while. And there's been people that have had to make do with what they have. And now standardization is coming in, or maybe there's been acquisitions and processes are changing to reflect that. How does that impact an organization at a high level?
Well, first of all, I think that when we think about change, we need to understand first that organizations are essentially little societies. And societies develop over time. Sometimes they go through a lot of change very rapidly, but there's always going to be some kind of centralized government and villages. These are the different business units, teams, etc. And you can always have a healthy organization when there's a good balance between that formal infrastructure from the primary organization, the C suite, and the villages, the different BUs. They have their own systems, their own control, etc. And that's like a healthy thing. But when new changes are implemented in terms of standardization, it's primarily with the remit of providing a common language and common systems for consistency, efficiency, etc. And what you see a lot of the times, especially in organizations that have a really rich legacy, these are organizations that have formed their culture just like a little civilization would over many, many, many years and the labor of many people. So when you're rolling out something that formally connects all of these different villages by the capital city, say, and they're saying, let's build some infrastructure that connects all of us and establish the governance that will make it work most efficiently, that's going to impact the systems that may have been set up ad hoc as needed by these villages. And that's something that should be factored in, but also potentially even celebrated. The fact that these civilizations have pockets of innovation that form and develop their own systems as needed. When we come in with organization-wide change, it may mean sacrificing some of the ownership that was originally held by these creators and stakeholders that spun up solutions as they saw them and as they needed them.
So then when we do come into an organization or our little villages, as we're talking about, and we are coming to tell them that we're going to change these systems or these workarounds or these things that they had to build to just exist, how do we do that without triggering defensiveness or getting people to feel like we're taking something away from them?
Absolutely. So I think that putting on the hat of both an anthropologist and an ambassador is important, because if we're imagining, again, sticking to our analogy of the capital is building infrastructure that will inevitably connect all these different villages together, make trade better, improve quality of life, that's great and all. But let's remember that the people who developed the current roads are people who are leaders in these individual villages and communities. And when you come in with a proclamation of uniformity, inevitably it does solicit a little bit of anxiety potentially. These are people who have had control and taken pride in their work and what they've built for themselves and their teams. And so, first, the anthropologist hat. Understand where these people have come from, the history of these villages and little team organizations. Understand why these decisions were made and ask a lot of questions. In terms of just very practical advice, I would say that understanding and conducting a good impact analysis of the scope of your change and talking to people in the individual business units who have knowledge and are running the current systems that will be impacted. That's a given. You want to talk to those people and engage them early to understand how they've set these things up, why they've set these things up, their logic, their systems, their protocols, their culture. And second is the ambassador role. So you're acting on behalf of the capital in this scenario, but you're advocating for the interests of all the different villages and the citizens therein. So you want to represent the why, lead with that. I know it sounds a little bit obvious, but sometimes we get so busy just trying to move things forward that we forget to truly reflect on the goals and benefits of a project. Come in well briefed with the scope and reason of this new architecture, lay it out in front of your village leaders and say, look, here's what we plan to do. Can you walk me through your current system? And then we'll figure out how to make this transition together.
So, when we're looking at these leaders and these folks that have all of this institutional knowledge for us, how do we make sure that we're tapping into that in our process of change and how we're redesigning things to make it as valuable as possible for everyone involved?
I think something that is commonly overlooked when implementing um, a standardization of any type is how do we formally reflect this in structure too? Because I think a lot of people have come up to speed enough with basic change management that they understand that first part that I brought up earlier about engaging people. It's easy to engage people. It's easy to tell them what's going on and bring them into meetings and so forth. But if you don't do so in a way that also formally aligns them with the project in some way, you run the risk of appearing as if this is just a gesture of tokenism. You're telling people, hey, look, we involved all the village leaders, but we didn't really formally reflect that into their interests as well. We just briefed them and talked to them, and that was about it. If at all possible, and this does take some time, some effort, and some foresight, formally build roles that are bridge roles, people who are accountable both to the village and to the capital. So, if you know a really, especially if it's a really massive fundamental change, I would say if it's either a massive shift to knowledge management process, a cloud modernization, et cetera, if you can scope out in advance while doing your change impact analysis and planning who the names are that will need to be involved and then build in to their goals, even if at all possible, their alignment and formal role structure as an SME and a participant. Because if you engage simply by talking, but you don't build this into people's goals, incentives, you run the risk again of that tokenization, and it feels just like a flat gesture without true involvement. When it comes to maximizing, though, their industry knowledge and expertise, you can count on these people who are leaders within their individual teams and business units to be a rich resource of information on context, on culture, and on process. So, for example, if you are walking in as a representative of the enterprise, the capital, if we're using this analogy still, you may not be privy to some of the nuances of that particular business unit or village. In fact, I'm going to eliminate the word may. You won't. You simply won't have the context that these people have. Identify people who have a good network in that BU, who have been there for a while, potentially. I'm not saying that you can't involve all different perspectives. You should. You should include people who are newer to the organization, who may have a fresh perspective, but you do want to tap those who have that legacy knowledge and the memory of this culture, and consult with them early on, especially again if you have them formally aligned and assigned to this project. Try to surface things that may not appear as obvious of an impact for your change. So ask about people's attitudes. Ask about what is the current state in theory versus practice, because I guarantee there's always going to be a gap in process, in function between the theory and the practice. And usually some of these people who have built independent ways of doing things just to meet a need and take care of their people, usually there's a little bit of patchwork involved because they're making do with the resources at their disposal. Offer your resources to them. Again, recommunicating that benefit, that need, and appoint them to a position of influence in your change rollout.
Thank you so much for joining me for the conversation. And I have to say one thing, as you kept saying the Capitol, my head started going to the Hunger Games every
Oh
single time.
no.
And how I just want to put it out there to everybody. The goal is to remain as far away from the Capitol in the Hunger Games as humanly possible as you're leading a change within your organization.
Oh gosh, no. And allow me to, because thank you for bringing that up. In terms of the capital, I'm speaking about the common centralization of your organization, the common language, and what brings people together. We have organizations that are really successful that have a healthy balance between centralized policy and power and structure and federated. So you want to, as you're rolling out, even as you're thinking through your standardization goals, think about how much of the balance you want to lean on that federated model, how much you want to leave up for room for your different stakeholders and be used customized as they see fit, and how much you want to be that common language, common infrastructure with paved roads that everybody can drive on.
The nice balance, like we've talked about many times before, it's all about the balance in general in life, right? And finding where the sweet spot is for you and your company. But thank you so much for joining me for the conversation, and for everybody for watching. If you're not already, make sure you get connected with Elsie on LinkedIn so that you guys can chat even more about all of this, and let either one of us know if you've got any questions. But thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks so much, Emma.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.